All
Hello.
right. It looks like it's live. Hello, Matt.
I'm sorry you look like you're delayed. I hope I'm not echoing.
Nope, you're not echoing. Are you
Good.
sure it's delayed?
Oh no, your video is delayed from the voice, but everything else is fine. So I'm good to go.
Good. How are you this week?
Good. A little tired, but good. How about yourself?
I'm feeling more rested. Um, yeah, it's not quite as busy right now, so that's good.
Good.
This week I mentioned to you that I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that cultural um, our cultural background of growing up in evangelical Christianity.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this before and how, I don't know, like I have a vivid memory of being, I think I was about 20 or so, 19 years old, and I was with Youth with a Mission, and maybe I was 20. Anyway, it doesn't matter, but young. And they all laid hands on me and they prophesied and they said I was going to be an Esther to save the next generation, right? And I kind of find that funny now, but it was one of these things that an Esther, for anybody that's watching that doesn't know, was this.
Mommy, Dad, stop watching her.
Hi, Owen.
Stop watching her about the builder.
Yes.
I think he's gonna make a cameo appearance every week. So anyway, Esther was this queen that she married she ended up marrying a man. She was Jewish. She ended up marrying King Xerxes, the Persian king, but he didn't know that she was Jewish. And she ended up able to save her people from total destruction when an enemy tried to create a situation where they would be able to kill off all the Jews. And because of her husband's great love for her, she was able to turn the situation around and save her people. And so that prophecy, was over me somehow. I was going to be in this situation where I'd be able to, I guess, save all the Christians from certain destruction. I'm not really sure what it meant, but anyway. And I was just thinking about the mantle that this kind of, these kinds of prophecies put on you, the weight, that belief that you somehow needed to save people. You were somehow supposed to do something great with your life. And so I don't know if I have a question about it so much as I kind of love to hear your experience with that and how maybe you feel about that now, 20 years on. You probably had a similar prophecy made over you. How do you feel about that 20 years on? Like, what did that kind of do to you? And how do you feel about all of that now? That cultural background that we had that put that kind of heavy weight on us as far as what we were supposed to do with our lives.
Right. Mine was a little funny. It was a little bit different in a way because I had a similar experience, except it was again during a Youth with a Mission with the DTS or whatever. And this one guy picked out two of us guys, and he was like, what did he say about us? That we were like going to be like Saul, though, which is like the anti to that Esther, right? Like that we would be leaders, but then we'd fall away, or we could and bring other people with us or whatever. And so we're sitting there, and the other guy just looks at me and he goes like, this guy knows nothing about anything. It's just like, the people just make it, which was actually a really good response. It was just like, this is just some guy's opinion who knows nothing about us, which is true. And he was definitely was not a full-on believer. He was more the kind of guy, I think, who was going just for, an adventure or something exciting to do. He was definitely not in the bought and dyed in the wool type. I've bought into all of this thing. So that was an interesting experience for me. And it's one thing that you think about it, but, and it's true. They were like, what they said was, that most people go on these youth with a mission DTS things when they're young. By the time, they're like our age, that they've fallen away, that most of them aren't involved, or they may not even be Christian anymore. And I guess in one sense, them looking at me, I'm not their ideal of a Christian. So I don't conform, and I'm much too lax and liberal, and so I guess there was some right. Now, did I take a whole bunch of people with me in this, or a nation or something? No. So I don't know. It's interesting. I guess you can have
yet.
That.
You haven't
Yes,
done that.
right,
Yes.
right, yes. I haven't led.
But you might just become, we're talking about the Saul character who became Paul, though, right?
No, talking about the Saul character from the David story. So he was the king before David, right? And he did all these terrible things, and then God took his hand away from him, and then he died, basically, the unloved leader who had been a leader and could have been great, and then ended up dying not being great.
Okay, so the basic idea of this prophecy over you is that you had God's blessing and God's mantle, but it was going to be taken away because of your own sin.
If you weren't careful. Exactly, if you weren't careful, right?
Okay. Yeah, well, I'm sorry. I'm glad you had the friend there who said to you, this guy doesn't know anything.
It's a funny experience. On the other, like on one hand, it's also just a whole funny thing, because you never have somebody go up to you and be like, I mean, God told me that you're going to be a really nice, normal person, and nothing of excitement's ever going to happen to you. And but you're going to have a good family, and you're going to live in the suburbs, and you're going to die, and nobody's going to know who you are, but you won't have done anything terrible. That's God's blessing, because you were in America, and you're going to be like richer than 95% of the rest of the world, and you should be thankful for that. Nobody ever says that.
No, it's always all about the great things you're going to do, or apparently the terrible things that you're going to do.
Either way.
Oh yeah. Well, it was a weird culture to grow up in. It didn't feel weird at the time because it was what we were used to. And I mean, that wasn't exactly how we grew up at home.
Right.
Our parents weren't running around laying hands on us and prophesying that we'd be, Esther's, or that there was the danger of us being Saul. But the greater world in which we lived in.
And there's something comforting, and it's a hard balance to strike. I've been, thinking about it. It's comforting to think that, okay, there's some sort of big plan out there, and God has this place for you in it, and it's all going to be, if you just follow the right rules or do whatever it is that he wants, if you listen to him and follow his way, that you can be part of this big plan and be part of this exciting thing that's happening, that's going to save the world. But on the other hand, you have to believe that that's super tenuous, and that God really doesn't have a very good hold on what's going on, because if you kind of stray out of the line, then you can be captured by Satan and go to hell. And that, like, all these other people, the way to God is narrow, is very straight but very narrow, and you can't, and only a select few are going to be able to find it and discover it. So it's like this dichotomy of if you follow God's will, God's going to make things great and awesome. But on the other hand, there's this malevolent evil out there that's very powerful, and any little walking outside the line or not listening to God, and you're going to burn in hell. And so it's kind of it's a weird world, because you have to believe in two opposing ideas at once. One, that God is in control of everything, and yet that all these evil and bad things are not his fault, and that these things could happen unless you stand in the gap and stand there and oppose it. And God can do anything, but he's not going to do it. He's not going to do anything, so you have to have this weird belief of like, God can do anything, but he's not going to do just anything. Just really isn't going to do anything. And quite frankly, most of the world is not going to make it to heaven, because if they were, then it wouldn't be so hard, right? If it was easy, then why wouldn't everybody just be like us doing this? So it must be hard. But it's also comforting to know that you can be a part of this big thing, whatever this is, and that you can fit in. But I also, I have friends who are still involved in the culture in a way that I think there are many of them who are involved in the culture that are doing great things and don't believe kind of what I'm saying and how I'm presenting it, and they live I think they're living an extraordinary life and a good life. But I also have friends that I think are in this, that kind of belief is detrimental and destructive to them as people, because they're frozen. Yes, you can. They're frozen in place, waiting for God to tell them what to do, and they're so afraid. They're wondering whether that's God whispering to them, or whether it's really some malevolent spirit trying to trick them into thinking that's God's will, but it really isn't. And they're just struggling with their lives. And I feel bad about that, because sometimes I feel like it's better just to be average and live your life and celebrate it, instead of always us having to save the world. And
yeah, I mean, that's what I think about it. Like, leaving that culture behind felt like a huge, it was really difficult to do, because it had been everything to me. And it was a huge relief in some ways, because I no longer had to feel like I had to fulfill some destiny of greatness. But at the same time, I've always, like, that lingers with you. It still lingers with me today. And maybe that's partly being a woman in today's culture. And maybe that's partly having grown up in this evangelical Christian culture, that I still always feel like I need to do more, that I'm not doing enough, and that I do feel this need to, like, somehow save the world. And it's hard to throw that shackle off. So I did my best when I left the culture behind, and I felt a lot of relief. But now, 20 years later, it feels there's still a sense of letdown. Like I should have still done something great with my life. I don't know.
Right. I guess, but I don't know. I think also there's a big difference between having the burden of saving people and having the freedom to help people. Because there's a big difference. Like, when you have to save people, it's not just enough to help them. It's not just enough to be like, well, I can't help you with that because I know nothing about it. I mean, that's totally legitimate. Like, I'm going to cause more problems coming in here and helping you build houses, even though, because I know nothing about it. I'm terrible at this. I don't understand anything of doing it. Like, that's a totally legitimate thing to say, but you can't really say that when you're going in to save somebody's soul. And it's a whole nother thing to have an area of expertise where you can go in and be like, hey, I'm going to help you, but with this thing, like, we're going to get you some clean water, but I'm not here to change your whole everything about you.
Right. I'm not trying to see.
Yeah. I don't have to save your soul. Like, you don't have to turn from your cultural religious identity to a totally different cultural religious identity. And so, right. And so I think there's a freedom in that. whereas I think in our past culture, you felt like you had to almost like trick your way into societies that really didn't want you to be there, so that you could trick them into becoming Christians. Like if they really saw it and really saw how great it was, then they would turn to it. But and there again, you had, yeah, but and there again, you had to have that, keep that dichotomy in your mind of God can do anything and he can help me with these miracles, and yet he can't, it doesn't work most of the time. or a lot of time. I don't know if that makes sense, because it's
no. Well, I found what you said just a few minutes ago to be kind of deeply profound, because there is a big difference. What you said basically is there is a big difference between this burden of needing to save somebody versus the freedom of just being able to help somebody a little bit, you know?
Yeah, right.
And yeah.
One is open-handed. The other is you can have this, but does that make sense? When you're helping somebody, it's always open-handed. It's here it is. I'm helping you. The other one is I have this thing to help you, but I want something in return from you. And I will open a little bit, you open a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it's,
at least that's how it feels to me. I mean, that's definitely not how it feels to everybody who's in the evangelical culture, and it may not be that way for many of them. Many of them sacrifice a great deal, but to me, it always felt like I was sacrificing to get something in return, to save people's souls, instead of that idea of being a neighbor, as Jesus would have really said, you know, what do? You know, love your neighbor as yourself. And that was kind of the end of his law.
Right. It wasn't love your neighbor as yourself so that your neighbor will believe exactly what you believe. And
yeah, I mean, but then somebody would come back and say, but he also said to make disciples of all men. So like you know, so there's always these dichotomies in the Christian culture, and it's a difficult, sometimes you have to, there's interpretation as to what Jesus meant with all of this, and the evangelical interpretation is very different than the Catholic interpretation of what Jesus said versus my own personal interpretation. And that sounds very wishy-washy and also very postmodern, but I also wonder, any translation of even just a simple poetry has so many different flavors to it, that I can't imagine trying to think of something spiritual and like a psychologically spiritual thing, trying to translate that without there being an interpretation to what you think they're saying. That may get lost in translation, no matter how good you are.
well, maybe that's a good place to end. We're at 20 minutes. There's no way we
go
had
on.
like 5 hours to actually.
Yeah, we could probably go on about this for long periods of time, but yeah, it was good.
All right. See you next week.
All right, see you next week. Bye.